thank you all so much for coming, and a big thank you to Destiny for making it here today and agreeing to this debate. Before we dive into arguments today, I want to tell you about one of the bravest people that I know, my friend, Liana Robledo. When Liana was just 12 years old, she was taking a walk to a supermarket. She was kidnapped and raped in Mexico City. After a suicide attempt, she was taken to the hospital where she learned that she was 13 weeks pregnant. The doctor urged her to abort, telling her that she shouldn't have to live with the consequences of her rape. But Liana asked him this question that left him speechless. She said, "Will abortion take away the rape? Will the abortion make me feel safe again?" Liana chose life. She gave birth at 13 years old, fought through post-traumatic stress disorder from her assault, worked as a cashier while finishing high school, and by 16 years old was providing for herself and for her daughter. She would end up graduating from UCLA, my alma mater, and she started a nonprofit to support assault and abuse survivors. She says something that I will never forget. Liana says, "I've never seen in my daughter the face of my assailants. She's an individual who had nothing to do with that. 2 lives were saved. I saved my daughter's life, and she saved mine." Liana's story frames tonight's question that we are here to debate. Should abortion be legal? Here is the core case that I present. It is always wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human life. Abortion is the act of intentionally killing an innocent human life. Therefore, abortion is always wrong and must be illegal. Let's be clear about what abortion actually is, because it's often used in conversations and debates euphemistically. Abortion is the direct and intentional killing of a preborn child. Abortion kills a child via multiple methods. One of them includes a child being ripped apart limb from limb while still alive with forceps or vacuum suction. Or the abortion may involve stabbing the child in the heart or the brain with a large needle, injecting poison that can cause a heart attack. Or it can involve draining the child's blood until the heart stops. In chemical abortion with pills, the child is starved to death of nutrients, starved of nutrients until it is killed. Every day in America, over 2,800 children are being killed by abortion. This is wrong. Just like it should be illegal to kill humans outside the womb, it should be illegal to kill humans inside the womb. Now, here's what might surprise you. Based on previous comments that Destiny has made, including in conversations that he and I have had, Destiny has actually said that he agrees with some of the pro-life argument. He has said before that he agrees that it is wrong to kill innocent human persons. He also he disagrees with when life begins, and we'll talk about that in a minute. He argues that human life begins when a preborn child has the capacity for conscious experience, which he says is between 16 and 20 weeks. This does create some common ground. First, according to these past debates Destiny has done, we both agree that abortion should be illegal after 20 weeks. Second, we agree that if there's a living human being in the womb, bodily autonomy arguments don't work. Bodily autonomy doesn't give me permission to take another person's body and kill an innocent human life. Parents also are obligated to care for their children, and those obligations require using our bodies, both for the unborn child and for a born child. So we agree in this sense that my body, my choice as an argument fails. Third, we've even agreed that in cases of rape or incest, like my friend Liana, if there's a living human being in the womb, that child should not be killed. And finally, we agree that if there's a living human being in the womb, there should be penalties for those that take that child's life deliberately. So the question is, where do we disagree? Where does Destiny and I disagree? And of course, he'll share more here shortly. Our disagreement seems to boil down to one key question: when does human life begin? I agree with the science that human life begins at fertilization. Destiny believes that it begins at the capacity for conscious experience. Here's the problem. Consciousness is fluid, not fixed. The brain constantly grows and develops throughout pregnancy and our entire lives. Brain development continues until ages 25 up to 30. In fact, many of us in this room, our brains are still developing. We go in and out of consciousness daily. And in the evening, you will go out of conscious this evening. In the womb, brain waves are detectable at just 6 weeks from fertilization. At 9 weeks, the child can suck her thumb, swallow, grasp objects, touch her face, sigh, and stretch. Neuron multiplication is especially rapid around 15 weeks. In this process of rapid development, where exactly do we draw the line to determine some should be protected and some shouldn't? It's impossible. Many of us have no memory before the ages of 3 or 4. Maybe very rarely, 2.5, you might have a memory, but it's very rare. 3 or 4 is usually the mark. Does that mean that it is okay to kill children before memory? Of course not. Here's another illustration. Imagine that you're sound asleep, not even dreaming. Someone comes into the room and kills you with some painless gas poison in the air that kills you in your sleep. You have no awareness of this happening. You've just drifted from sleep to death. Is that okay? You're not conscious. Of course not. It's first-degree murder. Life and murder aren't defined by someone's present capacity for consciousness or conscious experience. We would never kill someone in a temporary coma. It would be wrong. We should also never kill a human being who will have a future conscious experience like the unborn. All human beings have a capacity for consciousness according to our nature. It is our human nature to develop consciousness. That is a natural capacity that we have, which is different from the active capacity based on development when we can deploy that consciousness. A preborn child or a newborn child has a rational nature even though they haven't actively developed it yet. Today, abortion advocates say that unborn children are not persons, so they can be aborted at will. But every atrocity historically has begun with that lie. They're not one of us. This group of people is not one of us, and therefore it can be justified to kill them. The medical science here is clear. The developing human, a medical textbook states, quote, human development begins at fertilization. This highly specialized cell marks the beginning of each of us as a unique individual. And even Peter Singer, who is a avid pro-abortion advocate who even supports ending the lives of newborns within the first 3 to 6 months, especially if they have a disability. He thinks that's morally illicit. He says, there is no doubt from the first moments of its existence, an embryo conceived from human sperm and eggs is in fact a human being. Our founding principle in this country is that all humans are created equal and endowed with that fundamental first right, which is life. The 14th Amendment promises equal protection under the law for all persons. If preborn children are human, and the science confirms that, they deserve protection. After Roe v. Wade was overturned, states protecting life saw abortion rates plummet. Texas saw a 99% decline in legal in-state abortions. The law is a teacher. It restrains evil and it protects the vulnerable. So, should abortion be legal? No, not if we believe in science, equality, and human rights. The right to life, your right to life, my right to life, does not depend on consciousness, convenience, circumstances, your development, or your dependency. It depends on the simple fact that you are human. All human beings should be protected from murder from the moment we are conceived until natural death. So let's choose life, let's protect the preborn, and let's build a culture where every child is loved, welcomed, and protected.
Person is the name that we give to the complex emergent phenomenon generated by the underlying physical structures of the human brain. To pretend otherwise is to strain one's imagination and force one to adopt a position that is both unreasonable and unintuitive. At times, it's possible to over-intellectualize things to the point of absurdity, like a painter taking a step back to look at his entire canvas, or a composer putting down his pen to play and listen to what he's crafted so far. It's good to occasionally take a step back and explore intuitions to ensure they haven't strayed too far from what is reasonable and what is real. If we have a clear and unambiguous ending for a thing, such as a person's life, then why not investigate that ending to see if we can get any hints as to how it begins? Let's ask ourselves, when do we consider a human person no longer a human person, but just a human body? Is it after their corpse fully decomposes? Is it when their heart stops beating? Is it when they lose a limb? Of course, we all know the answer to this question. It's when their brain loses the ability to host the mind. We could consider, is it truly the brain that's so special? But of course it is. There could be no other answer. If I replaced your arm with a bionic prosthetic, are you still a person? What about both arms? What about your heart? Or how about your eyes and ears? If you awoke in a mad scientist laboratory and he was going to separate your head from your body, but he only had the technology to keep one of these two things alive, would you choose your body or your head? Anyone who's played Wolfenstein 2 will know the answer to that question. Okay, getting rid of the rest of my video game jokes in here. All right, okay. No, it's all good, it's all good. Really, though, deep down, we all know the answer to that question. Replacing a person's head or brain would not only fundamentally alter who they are, destroying it would change the very nature of what they are and turn them into something that's not quite a human person. Even without mad scientist hypotheticals, we can look to the real world and see what neurodegenerative diseases do to a person and how those people around that person respond. What is more devastating than to lose a person we love to the horrors of mind diseases like dementia? How many times have you heard a complaint from someone that a parent or grandparent truly died long ago and yet their body still remains? It's plainly obvious that a sufficiently developed brain hosts a uniquely human mind, and this is the thing that makes us who we are and grants us the same personhood that we recognize in others. It is the thing we cherish most and is the thing we try to protect when we speak of morality and law. In this debate, Lila's going to bounce between a lot of different words in order to try and force your intuitions to stray from where they would be otherwise. She'll casually swap words like child and fetus and embryo and human and person in order to confuse and obscure, but make no mistake, this confusion is not by accident, it's by design. She'll try to say that an embryo is not simply an embryo, but a human embryo, as though the answer to the beginning of life was always hidden in a Merriam-Webster dictionary waiting for someone to read it. I have a feeling that if the answer were that simple, we probably would have solved this debate a long time ago. I will remind the audience as well that the potential of a thing is not the thing itself. The human embryo, were it to have some features that were worth moral protection, would be worth protecting in the present all on its own. Instead, constant allusions will be made to the future of the embryo. If anything, I treat this as an immediate concession that the embryo is indeed without moral value, which is why Lila will need so desperately to invoke the future of the thing to salvage any moral value from it at all. Lila will argue that a person begins at the instantaneous moment of conception, as though conception were a single moment in time. What is she even defining conception as? Is it the moment the egg recognizes the sperm to permit entry? Is it when the egg no longer permits the entry of any other sperm? Is it when membrane fusion has fully finished? Is it when the first set of chromosomes have made copies of themselves, or is it after they've divided into pairs? Conception is just as much a multi-stage process as pregnancy, and to pretend as though there is one spark at a very precise moment in time that defines the entirety of conception is to scientifically misunderstand and misstate the process. Lila will argue that unique DNA is what makes us human, but for some reason this doesn't apply to hair or skin or any other cells in the human body. She will say that a zygote with its own DNA can go on to develop to become its own human, but what of identical twins that split from the same zygote to become two? Does Lila consider identical twins two halves of the same soul or mind? Are they each their own person? Did the death of one person give way to two? Lila will make arguments relating to law, but why? It was only a few years ago that abortions were more widely permitted in the United States, and certainly Lila was no fan of those laws back then. I've heard her make references, and she just did earlier, to the 14th Amendment and the guarantee of equal protections, but why does she only consider those protections with regards to the rights of the fetus while completely ignoring the rights of the pregnant woman? And all of this while ignoring the first three words of the 14th Amendment she cites, which are, all persons born. Think about the kind of world that Lila's positions would commit us to. We would need identities, legal documentations, and protections for every single newly conceived zygote. Due to the high rate of natural miscarriage, every single conception would need to be registered at a local government office for tracking. If a zygote is not eventually delivered as a human baby, a criminal investigation should be required to determine the cause of death. Why wouldn't it be, unless we're admitting that a zygote is worth less than a baby outside the womb? The CDC estimates that about 1 million miscarriages a year occur in the United States. Forget Child Protective Services, we'd need a whole fetal protective services just to keep track of the massive loss of life already occurring according to Lila's framework. Also, consider that Lila is demanding that we place a higher burden on a raped child than we would on an adult attempting murder. Even in the case of attempted murder, we would never demand the assailant donate their organs from their own body to the victim in order to sustain the victim's life. Yet, for some reason, we would make the same demand of a young girl who's committed no crime. Far from mandating parents to donate blood or tissue to their children, we actually have special carve-outs for groups like Jehovah's Witnesses that bar their children from receiving life-saving blood donations. Yet in Lila's world, we would force mothers to commit to donating 9 months of their own body to an entity that hasn't yet even developed the capacity for thought. In Scooby-Doo, how is it that a gang of meddling kids and their talking dog always seem to get the best of the monsters they encounter? It's because once the mask is lifted, the monster is not a monster at all. It's simply a person masquerading as such. Lila's arguments against abortion are very much the same. Her worldview is entirely informed by her religion, and the mask of logic is only applied after the fact to sway those who would otherwise be unconvinced by religious arguments. Think if abortion were, as Lila would have you believe, the crime of infanticide, of murdering an innocent baby child, one would imagine she would be compelling us to do everything within our power to limit the amount of abortions that happen. And yet Lila is a relentless advocate for the very same behaviors that tend to produce the most amount of unwanted pregnancy. Lila believes in abstinence-only education, claims that contraception is immoral, and thinks that even forms of sex outside of penis and vagina intercourse are immoral as well. Lila believes that every single time two people come together, it should be only with procreation in mind, as sex was only designed by God for a husband and a wife to conceive. There is no way to collectively rationalize all of these positions unless one accepts that her positions on these matters are simply entirely informed by her religion. Every position related to sex, contraception, children, and yes, abortion are ultimately grounded in her religious beliefs. Her secular argument for a pro-life position is nothing more than
Thank you for your opening
disguise.
remarks, Destiny. That's the time.
Thank you for your comments and remarks, Destiny. So first of all, Destiny's entire case, I want to respond to some of the things he said and debunk them. But first of all, his entire case rests on this idea that it's okay to exclude an entire group of human beings from legal protection, that meaning it should be a free-for-all to end their lives, and we should permit the ending of their lives based on what standard? And he sort of referenced a standard of consciousness because he made some comment about how at the end of life we should be able to identify what is different, what makes a person's life end, and therefore at the beginning of the life we should look to that same standard for the beginning of the life, which never backing up that statement. I want to present as an example the case of Jax. Jax is a young boy who died at age 5. He was born with severe anencephaly, so he was not able to have most of the conscious experience that any other person in this room may enjoy. And Jax was missing pretty much all of his brain. He had his brain stem still intact. By Destiny's argument, Jax would be less of a person, less status of a person because he is missing most of his brain. Your brain does not make you a human. Your body parts do not make you a human. It is your composite that makes you a human. And Jax, just like every other human life, should be protected. We don't protect people based on their development. We don't protect people based on their powers. We don't protect people even based on whether or not they are conscious in any given moment or have developed consciousness. We should protect people based on the fact that they're a member of the human species. Your membership in the human species should give you protection under our legal code. Any other argument leads to great injustice and has historically and continues to lead to that injustice today. Now, Destiny made a number of remarks here arguing against my position, saying, first of all, that our position of making children in the womb legally protected would somehow mean that we would need to create legal identities for every unborn child. It's not workable, therefore, he was arguing, which is completely false because you don't need to create legal documentation for unborn children. We've had abortion banned before and we didn't need to do that, and we can have abortion banned now as we have in many states, and we don't need to do that. So that was an argument that I believe is false. He also said that because miscarriage rates are so high, therefore that would mean that we cannot investigate every single death, and therefore we should just allow abortions to happen, I suppose is the argument there. Again, false. We have a 100% death rate as human beings. We will all die at one point and another in our life. We will have our life ended, and usually that will be when we are elderly. You don't investigate every person's death who is an elderly because we know that we have a natural lifespan. Similarly, because miscarriage is a tragedy, I've had one myself, that would mean that you don't have to investigate every single death of a child that's very young and assign a police force to be investigating every miscarriage, as Destiny seemed to imply. Also, Destiny said that mothers are somehow forced to donate 9 months of their life, and this is somehow wrong. In past debates, Destiny has made the argument that it actually is licit for parents, and parents should have obligations, and that if they're past this arbitrary line of 20 weeks, then therefore they have the obligation then to care for that child, even if there's a difficult pregnancy or if there was rape or something like this. I'm curious if that is still Destiny's case or if he has changed his mind. But the bottom line is that there is something called parenthood that we've all enjoyed, or some sort of legal guardianship that we've all enjoyed. All of us were ushered in through safely, shepherded safely through pregnancy until birth, and we were all dependent at one point in our life. This is the natural state of the human person to begin their life dependent, and often we will end our lives dependent. It is essential for a just and functioning society to protect those that are dependent members of our human family. And that is why parents not just have rights, but they have responsibilities to care for their children, and that right begins, and that responsibility begins in the womb. Destiny also says that my position is completely based on religion. You heard my opening remarks. That is not correct. I can absolutely make a pro-life argument from religion, multiple multiple different world religions, actually, but my position was argued from a foundational principle that our country was founded on, which is that we have a right to life and we should be given equal protection under the law based on the 14th Amendment. And finally, Destiny made a comment about contraception, saying that Lila only wants to allow for sex that is only used for procreation and nothing else, which is a misrepresentation of my position. The reality is 9 out of every 10 people who have abortions are unmarried. Abortions is largely an unmarried people issue in our country because of premarital sex and the sexual revolution. People don't take responsibility anymore for the consequences of sex, which can naturally result in pregnancy. We have seen it now as our right to have sexual pleasure without commitment or responsibility or the lives that may come into existence. And the reality is, every single human life that comes into existence has a right to live. And that is why one of the many reasons why there should be sexual ethics. I think within a marriage, of course, sex is for two things. It's for procreation, and it also is for unity and pleasure between the spouses.
Apologies
so it was
for
a
the
misrepresentation
interruption,
of
but
the
we've reached
position.
the end of your allotted time.
Thank you.
So one of the statements that Lila makes is that I'm claiming that it's okay to exclude entire groups of human beings. I will say that we do bracket different rights for different human beings. If you're a minor, there's a whole bunch of things you're not allowed to do. You can't sign contracts. You can't engage in a lot of different types of things. Like, we already have an understanding that people of a certain age are bracketed different rights, but I'll be generous and we'll say, obviously, we're talking about whether or not you can kill a person or what you can do with this person's body. I will say that when we look at people who are in permanent vegetative states that are never coming back, when they've been kept on life support for some amount of time and we see that there's no more brain activity, we do terminate the vital functions of those people. If you look at a corpse that is a human corpse, the same rights are not extended to the human corpse that is extended to a living, thinking, breathing human being. So clearly there's something more at play than just being a human or just having a human body. The thing at play is very clearly the capacity to deploy our minds. It's our minds, the things that we are. When we speak of harm, we always speak of a person being harmed. If I separate my arm from my body and somebody does a whole bunch of things to my separated arm, I wouldn't even refer to that thing as me anymore. It would just be my arm. But who is me? Who am I referring to? It's clearly the mind that's being deployed by my brain. I think it's very obvious to say as such. When we look at things like this common argument that gets brought up is that, like, well, what about if a person is sleeping? What about if a person is, they get knocked out on playing kickball too much or something? And the idea that these people have somehow temporarily lost their humanity, in my view, there's a person to speak of there when we talk about who might be unconscious. I can't speak of a person when I talk about a fetus as being unconscious. It's not conscious. It doesn't even have the capacity to become conscious. If a friend were to take me to a McDonald's and we were to go outside and it was just a bunch of construction materials and he said, oh, sorry, it's McDonald's, but it's not going to be here for 9 months, I would say, this is not a McDonald's, bro. It's not even here yet. If a friend were to take me to a McDonald's just closed 30 minutes ago and he said, hey, this is McDonald's, I promise, but it closed 30 minutes ago, I can see that it's there. It's just not currently performing the function that I would hope from a McDonald's because it's currently closed. The same way that a sleeping person is not the same as a person who isn't even born or created yet. It's just a sleeping person who can redeploy that conscious experience at any point in time and who has a meaningful experience that we can speak about that would have asserted some preference while it was existing as a thinking mind, which a fetus has never done. We have weird arguments about, like, we don't investigate every single time a person dies. You kind of do. If an old person dies in a hospital or the causes are known and observed, then obviously, you fill out the death certificate and you're done with it. But there are investigations into old persons' homes all the time when old people are dying for reasons that people don't think they should be. Generally, child death is something that we're not normally expecting to happen. And I don't think that we would be okay with a 1 or 2 year old suddenly dying in a home without some kind of investigation, maybe not criminal, but at least some kind of preliminary investigation to make sure that nothing bad happened. Sometimes this argument about abortion and rape comes up when it has to do with underage people or really any person. And I hear this weird argument floated that the reason why you shouldn't have an abortion if you've been raped is because an abortion won't heal the first rape. I truly don't understand this argument. When I go to the doctor to heal a wound, I'm not looking for them to get rid of the pain of the initial wound. I'm hoping that I don't have to endure additional infection or other complications related to said wound. If a person is raped and as a result of that rape, they are now pregnant, when you're having an abortion, you're not looking to undo the conception. You're looking to undo the following 7, 8, 9 months of having to carry a child that you never even wanted in your body in the first place. I notice there's a lot of moral loading when it comes to abortion. We can talk about the forceps and the vacuums and everything else, but every time I hear this, it just feels like we're trying to move away from the actuality of what it is we're talking about, which is whether or not there's a person that exists whatsoever inside of the however many cells the zygote has divided into before it actually has developed the underlying brain parts needed to even deploy the minds that we consider worth defending as people. I thought the stat of the 99% decline in legal abortions in Texas was a good one, considering if you make something illegal, of course, there's going to be a massive decline in all legal abortions, given that they're not legal any longer. And I'm also quite familiar with the case of Jax. I believe Jackson, I think Buell or whatever was the last name. Unfortunately, sometimes there are things that go horrifically wrong when things are gestating in the womb. In the case of Jax, I believe it was like microhydroencephaly or whatever, but basically there were huge portions of the brain that just didn't develop. And the parents kept this child alive for 4 or 5 years, and it's tragic, but if you look at the child, if you watch the child during any of the speeches or any of the interactions, the child is clearly not conscious, not aware of the environment, not aware of anything that's going on around it. He responds to no stimulus. He is not capable of interacting with the parents in any meaningful way. And you can see this in any video that you watch of the child. And I think it's a bit sad sometimes that parents are kind of kept on this delusional string, hoping that something's going to change because they've been told something by somebody, when in reality, those brain parts will never grow and that child will never have an experience that is anything like ours.
You claim to be able to argue this topic from a rational, secular perspective. So then I would ask you, like I ask myself with any position that I hold, what would it take to change your mind on this topic?
It would take to prove that abortion does not take an innocent human life.
What would
Which
it
is
take
impossible because that's what it's designed to do.
What would it take to prove to you that a life doesn't begin at the very moment of conception, or that the mind is required, or is there anything that could move you on any of this?
I mean, if the science conclusively said, oh, we were all wrong, the science doesn't show that life begins at sperm-egg fusion when a single-cell embryo comes into existence, and somehow that was completely wrong for, decades, hundreds of years even now, then I'd look at that and say, wow, that's such an interesting thing that it's wrong. And then we would look at, well, when does life begin?
If somebody could imbue you with the ability to have memories of every single moment of your life, even before your brain would ordinarily record memories, and the first memory that you had was about 20 weeks in the womb, and you couldn't possibly remember being a single-celled zygote without the capacity for any kind of sensory input or any kind of memory at all, would that change your mind on it at all, or no?
No, I don't think memory is what gives me value as a human being or legal protection. I mean, when someone gets Alzheimer's, very tragically, my grandmother, towards the end of her life, suffered from dementia. It wasn't clear if it was full-on Alzheimer's or not, but she lost almost all of her memory. And she was just as much a human person as she was when she had her memory intact. And it would have been morally wrong and should be illegal to take the life of my grandmother.
Should women who have a high chance of miscarriage be banned from trying to conceive?
No.
So even if it was 50% chance of miscarriage, is there any other world where we would accept 2 adults engaging in a behavior that killed a child half the time it happened?
For the same reason that I don't think that we should ban people. It's Margaret Sanger as an example, right? The founder of Planned Parenthood. Her argument was that we should not permit those that were less fit to breed, to have children. And she actually wanted a 2-child policy. She wanted to sterilize. She actually proposed, and she actually was successful in having forced sterilizations of those that she saw as mentally unfit. Just because someone may die, they're sick, because someone might have perceived lower IQ than someone else, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't live and have a right to be protected the same way that anybody else does.
Sure. So I guess what I'm asking, I'm not necessarily asking from the perspective of the child, although kind of, in the child being unfit. I'm just saying that if there's some reason why 50% of the time the mother were to miscarriage, and that could be known ahead of time, are they not killing half the time, every time they attempt to conceive some new life?
Do you see the moral? There's a very profound moral distinction between a natural death, a death that is caused naturally, it's not intended and directly caused by another human person, and then a death that is directly caused and intended by another human person. One is a murder and one is a tragedy. In life, people die. We will all die, whether we are miscarried before we were even born, or we die at age 10 or age 20, or we hopefully live to be 100 years old. But the fact that you will die, whether very young or very old, doesn't change your humanity or your parents' right to, in love, conceive you and bring you into the world forever, however long or short that may be.
But there's no other circumstance you can think of where somebody could engage in a behavior that is so reckless that they know that there's a 50% chance of their child dying should they engage in that behavior, right?
Well, you could say that you could use that line of argumentation, Destiny, to say that people that have severe genetic health issues, or they're a carrier for a severe disability that's life limiting or threatening, right? They shouldn't be allowed to have children because, and this was the argument of Margaret Sanger, right? You know, a eugenicist, that if you are a carrier for some genetic abnormality that could lead to the death of a future child, you know, short-lived life, or they have a severe disability, somehow they should not be able to conceive and procreate. And I would say, no, every life has value and should have legal protection regardless of how long they live, how developed they are or not developed, or how dependent they are or not dependent.
Do you think that for people that have miscarriages, do you think that there should be some kind of an investigation to make sure that that miscarriage wasn't induced?
No, I don't.
Then what would prevent any other person from trying to induce a miscarriage, maybe excessive drinking or whatever else, physical trauma?
Unfortunately, the law is a teacher. The law absolutely has an impact on lessening crime, but it doesn't eliminate crime altogether. I mean,
No, but we would still pass laws to try to curb crime, right?
Of course, yeah.
So would you ever think of like...
But we enforce within reason. For example, in this country, we do not have cameras in every home. It's not like the government is surveilling every home to determine whether or not child abuse or neglect or other illegal acts are taking place. And there's a reason for that. It's not because we don't care about children and we don't want them to be abused or neglected, but it's because that would be an encroachment on the rights of the family to their privacy. So
that is true, but we would absolutely investigate the death of a 1-year-old in a household. We wouldn't just leave that to say, oh, it must have been.
Yes, because it's unusual for a 1-year-old to die. Unfortunately, because
I apologize for the interruption.
It is not unusual for a child to die in the first trimester. So we both talked about baby Jacks. Do you think that because, and you said he doesn't have consciousness, you haven't went as far to indicate that in your speech. Do you think that because baby Jacks is missing most of his brain and doesn't have consciousness, in your view, he should not have a right to live?
A right now, if the parents want to have that child and have that experience,
does he have a right? If the parents wanted to execute him, do they have the right to do that?
Yeah, I think they could have terminated that pregnancy at any point in time. Yes.
But as a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, does baby Jacks have the right to live, or can he be executed?
I think you can make the argument that if already committed to having it, they can't change their mind at that point.
Why?
But
Why? He doesn't have consciousness. That's your
because I think in
definition
terms
for
of
human value.
Are you asking me the moral answer or the legal answer?
The legal answer.
The legal answer is if you're I don't think you can create a world where you're giving birth to some children and then changing your mind a year or two later.
But Destiny, your legal position hinges on consciousness as the standard for human value under the law. Baby Jacks, according to your own statement, does not have human consciousness. Why would it be wrong to take his life at 2 or 3 years old?
So my legal position maximizes the right of a woman to do what she will with her body, because the most important part of my legal position is I'm trying to counterbalance the potential mishap of killing a human that might be a mind or a person before 20 weeks, whenever I decide, whatever the science says on that. And I'm trying to balance that against the mother's right to have an autonomy to her body, the right to her body to not be invaded.
As you mentioned yourself, it is a big responsibility to take care of a child with disabilities at 2 or 3.
Sure, but completely different than having to give your body to it, and that balance is gone once the child is born.
Let's say baby Jack's at, let's say 6 months old. Baby Jack's at 6 months old was completely 100% dependent on the bodies of his parents.
He was not.
Including the breasts of his mother if he was breastfeeding.
No, he was not.
Yes, he was.
He wasn't living inside the body of any of them.
Did baby Jack's feed himself?
No, but he can be fed. He doesn't have to. He can have access to.
Who feeds baby Jacks? Is it a robot?
It could be the dad. It could be the mom. It could be a sibling.
And are they using their body to feed baby Jacks?
I mean, in that case, we're using our body for everything.
Yes.
But that's become so reductively absurd that it doesn't really make sense anymore.
It's not reductively absurd. This is why parents can go to jail for parental neglect if they don't use their bodies to care for their children.
No, this is why when you put a person in jail, you can imprison a person, you can deprive them of all sorts of rights, but you can't take parts of their body in order to make another person whole. There's no
I don't
part.
think it follows that means just abortion's just.
There is no other part you can conceive of past conception where we're taking people's bodies and using them for
Let's
things.
ask you to define consciousness. You still haven't done this. Because this is your entire legal standard for some people that get to live and some people that can. No, it is your legal standard for people that get to live and people that get to die. What is consciousness?
I think that there is a part of there are parts of the brain, I think it's called the thalamocortical or whatever it is, but around it's anywhere from 16 to 24 weeks, the parts of the brain that we believe are necessary for deploying a conscious experience.
When you say
the scientific community broadly, when they're analyzing.
So would you say your standard is at 16 weeks that abortion should be
I don't know when exactly it is. You could put it at 16 if you want to be
How can it be a workable standard for determining which people are legally protected and which people aren't? How is that possibly a workable standard?
Because we have gradients in law all the time. There are plenty of things where we might not know the exact moment, so we back it up to a particular moment in time. We could say 16 weeks to make it there.
You're saying that abortion should be legal.
Yes.
Are you saying all abortion should be legal, or what abortions should be legal and which should be illegal?
I would argue that because of how doctors have to approach medically required abortions for the life of the mother, even in later trimesters, that all abortion should be legal, because if you start to make it illegal, then what happens is in the second, third trimester.
This is a new position, is it not, that you think abortion should all be
That's the legal argument. Morally, I would say that an elective abortion at 2
Is this a new position? I'm just curious that all abortions should be legal in your view?
That's the position I have right now on stage.
Interesting. Okay, that's good to know. Do you think think that a woman having an abortion of a baby at 34 weeks old because she no longer wants to be pregnant, there's no severe health issues or anything, that should be legally permitted in this country?
I would say it's immoral, but it should be legally protected.
Okay, do you think a baby at 9 months old, moments before birth, it is legal to kill that? It should be legal to kill, to take the life of that baby?
My only contention here is I'm pretty sure in those cases they would just deliver the baby. I don't know.
Well, they
if
would want to kill. I mean, you can deliver the baby at 34 weeks and the baby can survive. It's a
Sure.
high
So
chance
I don't
of
know if they
survival.
would. I don't know if they would ordinarily kill the.
Well, let's
baby
just
or
say, do
deliver
they
it.
have the right in your country?
The
where
legal
abortion is
right?
totally
The
legal,
legal right,
yes.
probably, but the moral right, I would say
So
no. It's
why
immoral.
would you restrict infanticide the day after delivery of a baby? Why would you legally restrict that if you even would,
Because there's no
versus
more-
a day before birth?
Because there's no more counterbalancing of the woman's rights to her body with the right of a child to live.
So you would not legally restrict you would legally restrict infanticide.
Yeah, I think killing babies is bad generally.
But what if a mother does not want to care for that newborn
She can
baby?
give it up for adoption or turn it over to the state.
What if the state doesn't want to care for that newborn baby?
When we're in a different country with a different legal system, I have to think of a
Do
different.
adults have responsibilities for children?
Generally speaking, yeah, we.
Do they have the response? Do adults, generally speaking, have the responsibility to use their bodies to take care of children?
To use their bodies?
Yes.
No, we go to work and stuff, but we don't
Who's
use
going
our
to take care
bodies.
of this baby that's being placed for adoption? An adult has to take that.
You don't put it in your body and take care of it that way.
But they still have to use their body to take care of this child, to feed and nourish and house this child. Is that not true?
It's a difference in kind of action.
I'm not asking about difference in kind. I'm asking if you think that adults have a responsibility generally to take care of children.
To take care of children, yes. To use their body like that, no.
So they don't have
Apologies
to
for
move
the
their
interruption,
bodies.
but
They
we've
just stay
reached the
still.
end of this segment.
Thank you.
The first question for discussion is for Lila. How do you view crisis pregnancy centers that disguise themselves to appear as medical reproductive clinics? Instead of offering legitimate health care, these facilities aim to dissuade women from receiving abortions or even general contraceptive options. They do this by spreading misinformation or using scare tactics. Do you see this as acceptable, or do you find it hurtful towards your cause?
It is false that pregnancy resource centers falsely misrepresent themselves. They are pro-life centers. They provide options for women, which includes support for carrying a child to term and parenting a young child, as well as adoption referrals. And I think that is real empowerment for women and real support to respect the dignity of the human person. And I think it's really shameful that there have been some very dishonest pro-abortion media attacks against these nonprofit centers that are doing incredible work in communities to serve low-income families. And instead, historically, we've spent money to abortion facilities and chains like Planned Parenthood and not funded the care of our young families. I think pregnancy resource centers are doing incredible work and deserve our support, and we should actually be defunding abortion facilities and closing them and giving our support to centers that actually support human life and dignity.
Thank you for that response.
Hi, Lila. Within the fight against abortion, there's been some division over how the law should treat those who participate. Some believe that both the abortion provider and the mother should face criminal penalties, while others disagree. What is your position on this issue, and how can we go about bringing unity within our movement?
I think that there should be criminal penalties for those that intentionally and willfully take human lives. And that can be the abortion provider, certainly, and that can be a mother and or a father. So I don't think that we should be giving anyone special immunity just because they happen to be a female or a male. I think that if there's willful and intentional, with full knowledge, pursuit of the killing of an innocent human life, there should be legal penalties for that.
My question for Destiny is, pro-life advocates at times contend that allowing abortion sends a message that human life is disposable, and that this cultural mindset contributes to wider social problems. From a pro-choice standpoint, how do you respond to this idea that abortion leads to a broader erosion of the value we place on human life?
Yeah, I would argue that every time these questions are brought up, it seems to only consider life from the moment of conception, which they'll just give, as an assumed given, but then it never really balances the rights of the mother, whose body now has to be a host or a gestation incubator for, a thing that they might not want to have anything to do with for the rest of the 9 months. I think that that's an argument that is fully informed by your view on abortion. I think that if you believe that life is a human life that should be protected at the very moment of conception, then obviously all forms of abortion would be something that that would degrade human life in general. But I think if you sit on the other side of that and you look at how people speak about babies, they speak of them as responsibilities or consequences or punishments for engaging in immoral sexual behavior, well, then it feels like the degradation of human life is coming more on the pro-life side, and that instead conception is basically just weaponized against women as another form of social control.
Thank you for your answer.
Okay, Destiny. So you've argued in previous debates as well as this one that human value begins with their first conscious experience. Scientific literature, however, does not have a consensus on this time frame, even though it's suggested around 16 to 20 weeks, as well as there's no definitive means of measuring consciousness. Shouldn't the ethical and legal default be to protect life rather than to risk the death of an innocent being who you have admitted would be deemed as valuable?
No, I think that sometimes we just have to make tough calls on rights that we dole out to different individuals. The one that I brought up before was the distinction between adults and children. There might be some children that have better mental faculty at 16 than some adults do at 25 or 35 or 55, depending on how crazy the adults are. But this is still a call that we have to make, that we have to roughly bracket off. I know that the counter argument to that is basically, well, aren't you here risking something of a far greater harm, that you might be killing a potential life? But again, I say that it's a balancing act, and the idea that a woman would have to endure a 9-month pregnancy just on the off chance that something at 1 or 2 weeks has a mind like ours that's even worth protecting, I think is a price that some people are too willing to bite the bullet on without fully considering. I think that if that same type of thing could be imbued on a person, that if there was a magical pregnancy wand that imbued you with all the traits of being pregnant for 9 months without the baby, if a person was coming to you with that wand to touch you with it, whether you're a man or a woman, I think most people would say you'd have the right to kill that person before they even got to you. But for some reason, when it comes to conception, that's just a thing that every woman is just expected to bear with no say over what goes on inside of her body.
Thank you, Destiny, for your answer.
I don't find the answers very compelling that for some reason we would give a special pass on certain types of infanticide, but not other types of infanticide. I think that is very telling. It feels very intuitive, I would say, for Lila's position that there is something that is fundamentally different about a conceived embryo, a conceived zygote, a conceived prior to 8 weeks, just a bundle of cell thing. There seems to be something different about that in kind to what would be a born baby. I don't think there's any world where anybody would willingly make the concession that a 6-month-old child could just die, that you could present this body to a hospital and that we should all just go on with our lives and expect that nothing would be investigated or nothing would come from that. We do know that there are a whole bunch of behaviors that a pregnant mother could engage in that could induce an abortion, and especially with abortion being illegal in Lila's world, we would expect a lot of people to engage in said behavior. So I do believe that her world would mandate some sort of investigations or criminal involvement for basically everybody that gets pregnant. To take it one step further, I also think that in her world, I think that we would approach the concept of conception completely differently. If we truly believed that every single miscarriage was the moral equivalence of a child dying, even if it is through natural processes, this would literally be the biggest scourge of our time. There's a million innocent, undefended, just totally pure babies that are dying every single year. I believe, according to the CDC, some 1 million a year. We would be doing everything we could to minimize the amount of death. And the idea that we would let people engage in sexual activity willy-nilly, that they could be getting pregnant and then killing babies by having a miscarriage and not doing the due diligence that they would need to make sure that they have a healthy pregnancy, I don't understand how that comports with Lila's view. I think that every woman engaged in any kind of sexual activity would basically be mandated to not drink or engage in any behavior that we would deem as high risk to any fetus, because who's to say you could be pregnant before you realize it, and you could be engaging in what would be the equivalent of manslaughter in any other circumstance. We live in a democratic society where we have to tolerate some differences in beliefs. There are many perspectives that exist in this country that disagree with one another, but at the end of the day, we all have to live under the very same set of laws. In my worldview, the abortion question is a simple, one-sided question. In Lila's worldview, it is a balancing act. On one side of the equation, the harm is inarguable. Pregnancy represents a severe injury against a woman's autonomy, as well as her physical and mental health. It requires lifestyle changes, introduces sometimes fatal medical complications, and forces a physical burden to be endured for months while a woman's body is used to gestate a growing fetus. Even if one doesn't fully agree with my position, one must acknowledge that there is a legitimate, substantial disagreement over when a fetus becomes a person who has rights that are morally defensible. When clear and obvious harms exist on one side, opposite of the hypothetical and religious harms on the other, the only collective moral decision we can make is to preserve in law a woman's right to choose.
Destiny's argument seems to boil down to that because pregnancy can pose a burden to women. Therefore, abortion should be legal at will, at the will of the mother, which is a different position than he's taken in the past. And I respect his, obviously, freedom to change his position. But the reality is, abortion is a direct killing of an innocent life. Abortion is not just a magical, the baby disappears switch that you flip. Abortion is an active killing of an innocent life. So if you want to talk about the mother's right, absolute right to end the life of her child versus the child's right to life, I think any just society has to weigh the child's right to life as paramount. And that's because our country is founded on that. We are founded on equal protection under the law. We are founded on life being the first human right. And the reality is that we all came into this world dependent, defenseless, and completely in need of nurture and help. We all came into the world this way. And to live in a world that says your dependency, the dependency that you have on your mother, in the case of obviously an unborn child, is the reason that you should not be protected legally anymore because you're so dependent, because women have this responsibility now as a mother to carry, to safely usher that child till birth. And then if they want, they can place for adoption, but they still have the responsibility. Even at birth, a child is still valued and needs the responsibility of the mother to carry that child safely to a safe harbor. That's why it would be illegal for a mother to give birth and just put a child in the trash in our current legal system. The reality is we all started life dependent. Many of us end our life dependent. And our humanity is what gives us value and rights. It's not our ability to be strong and independent. If we use that standard, the worldview that Destiny is positing and arguing for ultimately is a worldview of material utilitarianism, to say that if you are strong enough and independent enough, then you have a right to live. But if you are dependent and you're not strong enough, then others who are stronger and you are dependent will have the right to kill you. And that, I believe, is an unjust world that has led to the horror of today's abortion rate of 1 million children being killed every day, every year, 2,800 children being killed every day. What kind of world do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a world that sees human life as valuable and believes that human rights exist for all humans? Or do we want to create arbitrary standards? In this case of Destiny's position, birth is his standard. It isn't even consciousness anymore. He left that standard to the side, and now it is birth. Birth is the standard for human rights in Destiny's position. And I believe that is an arbitrary standard that is wrong and that has led and is leading today to the great injustice of abortion. The bottom line is any one of us, all of us, need to be protected at some point in our life. You will be dependent even as a person of middle age at some point. Maybe you're in a hospital. Your dependency on other people is ultimately not does not remove you from value.
We've reached the end of your allotment.
Thank you. Your dependency actually is part of your humanity, and every human life deserves protection. Thank you.
Thank you both.
My question is directed at Destiny. If you believe homosexual couples can have surrogates to have a baby, should they be allowed to abort the baby if, let's say, 2 months into the pregnancy, they decide that they don't want it anymore?
I mean, it really wouldn't matter where the baby comes from. If it's prior to that, especially 16-week cutoff, I'd say, yeah, anybody can make that decision.
Okay, thank you.
What trait distinguishes unborn human, embryo, zygote, baby, child, potential fetuses from an innocent animal that makes it right to kill them?
They're members of the human species. So under the law of biogenesis, if you have human parents, then you are human. So if you are an embryo that has a human mother and a human father, then you're a member of the human species and deserve legal protection.
This one is for Destiny. First of all, big fan, and I got that Wolfenstein reference. Really appreciated that. I want to respectfully ask you, if we intuitively understand that it is immoral for a pregnant woman to drink alcohol knowing she's pregnant to the extent that it would disable her child, then why would it be immoral to disable a child in the womb but not to kill a child in the womb?
Because you're not causing the harm to the developing fetus, the harm will be caused to a future person that will basically inherit that harm. So if you engage in a behavior and it leads to, let's say you decide to have an abortion of an 8-week-old, there would be nobody to speak of that's been harmed. If you start drinking alcohol and then you have an abortion later, then you would say nobody was harmed. But if you are setting somebody up to be damaged in the future, that would be immoral, not because you're damaging anything right now, but because you know you're committing a harm to a person that will be there in the future.
My question is for Destiny, and I'm curious if you believe that fathers have any right to the child that would supersede a mother's choice to an abortion.
Do fathers have rights to a child that supersedes a mother's rights to an abortion? I would say, unfortunately, in this case, probably not. It's just because of how, I guess, God has doled out our roles. Like the mother is the one whose body has to be used for gestation. The man can't share in that responsibility, so it would probably be the mother's call exclusively. Why would that be unfortunate? You said it unfortunately. Why would that be unfortunate? Well, it's unfortunate because life isn't fair, and unfortunately, genetically or biologically, we dole out different roles to different people. I think the conversation would be much different and much more interesting if men and women had an equivalent chance of getting pregnant. But because all of it falls to one side, the moral burden, then I would say that probably the decision-making all falls to one side as well.
My question's for Destiny. Destiny, how does your view of specifically consciousness not erode the idea of human equality? And so, like, specifically, right, if our value is based on our consciousness, as Lila stated in her opening, that's in flux. And so even if you believe that someone with, let's say, Alzheimer's or something does deserve the right to life, wouldn't your view at least imply that they are less of a valuable human being than someone that doesn't have Alzheimer's? And wouldn't this erode the idea of human equality?
I don't think it erodes the idea of human equality at all, because I mean, all of us theoretically can start to have, neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease. When it comes to dealing with people who are reaching, especially the end of their life, I mean, we literally make these types of decisions, and we already have like medical terminology. So DNRs, do not resuscitates, are already things that exist for people who have reached advanced stages of certain diseases that they can elect to sign. When it comes to Alzheimer's disease, my understanding is one of the more common ways that these people basically die is as the brain degenerates and they lose a lot of motor control. When they swallow, there's a lot of like bad stuff that goes between the airway and the normal tube for having food, and they get infections, they develop pneumonias, and all of this. You can infinitely resuscitate a person, or not infinitely, but over and over and over again to keep a person alive. But at some point, when you realize the mind is degraded enough, you kind of make a decision that like, okay, well, if this is how it happens, then this is how it's going to go. But that's in the case of like more permanent mind damage, like Alzheimer's disease. When it comes to people sleeping or waking up, like I go back to my McDonald's analogy, like a McDonald's that closes and then opens again the next day, there's a McDonald's there to speak of. When you go to sleep tonight, you're not disappeared from reality. Like people know who you are. You've asserted some level of preferences. You could be woken up like pretty immediately. There's a person there to speak of. And even if you didn't feel any physical pain, we can still say there's a moral injury or a moral harm by ending your life, because there's a life to speak of there that belonged to a person that was worth defending. For somebody that's never come into consciousness before, it's hard to even speak of who's being harmed besides a collection of cells that isn't even aware of itself yet.
Mainly for Destiny, I'm sure you're familiar with what Clinton said about abortion, that it should be safe, legal, and rare. I'm wondering how you feel about people getting multiple abortions, like 6 or 7 in 1 year. And I don't know the statistics, how like common that is, but how do you feel about that and the idea of creating laws that enforce and prevent multiple abortions? And for Lila, would you be open as sort of like a compromise to accept a law that limits people's ability to get abortions?
For mine first, if it's before that 16-week cutoff, then I guess I wouldn't really care. It'd be the same as contraception to me. There's a lot of religious people that view Plan B as being the equivalent of having an abortion. If it's after that point, would you make limitations for it? I'm sure at some point there would be, if I'm telling her that she would have to begin investigations for, miscarriages, then in my worldview, I would have to commit to some kind of an investigation for, a second or third trimester abortion. I imagine there would be behavior that if you would engage in it enough, at some point, there would be a mandatory check-in or to figure out what's going on. And then I mean, would you ban that person from having more abortions? I mean, I don't know how that would work. You're getting into weird topics of like forced sterilization. Like, what if they kept giving birth to children that they kept abusing or kept having to give to the state? I don't know exactly what the answer would be there, but prior to 16 weeks, it's all whatever to me. After 16 weeks, I think you're looking at a human being, a human mind that's being destroyed, and I think it's worth taking a more critical look at that than what I would prior to 16 weeks.
So abortion is already illegal in over a dozen states, and they're not miscarriage policing every miscarriage. Do I support abortion restrictions? Of course. I support completely abolishing abortion, though. That is the goal of the pro-life movement, is legal equal protection under the law to be enshrined for every human life, beginning inside and outside of the womb. If I'm in a red state, if I'm in a blue state like California that permits abortion effectively up until 9 months, and Gavin Newsom came to me and said, do you want me to ban some abortions? I would say, of course. I mean, I want you to ban all abortions, but I would be happy to see some banned as a first step. But I think it is possible. We have already done this successfully in this country in multiple states. We've been able to abolish abortion. And because Roe v. Wade was overruled as an unjust ruling, we now have the freedom to protect more lives, at least on the state level. So I think that we should be totally abolishing abortion.
During your debate with Lila on the Whatever podcast a few years ago, you used a lot of John Locke's arguments based on personhood and the capacity to have a conscious experience and subjective. When we look at the people who do forget parts of their memories in life, such as a person that suffers from amnesia, who doesn't remember anything, let's just say they are a brand new person with consciousness but has no recollection on who they were or the people around them and have lost all sense of their personhood. According to your framework, Stephen, this person would not be considered the same person pre-amnesia because this person no longer has the recollection of their past subjective conscious experiences, because personhood relies on consciousness relies on memory and subjective experiences. So this is where Lila's question about during that debate was left unanswered. Does that then give a collective society the right to kill a person who has amnesia, since they no longer, since they are no longer the same person?
So I think the ontology of like person or what that encompasses, if you think about it, I think it does include some type of memory. That seems to be a pretty important constituent element of who we are. A thought experiment I had on this was, imagine you are able to consent to you getting punched in the face tomorrow for $100, but imagine that once you consent to it, I'm going to wipe your memory of you consenting to it. And you know this beforehand, so you get to make this full decision knowing exactly what will happen. If you make that agreement and then I wipe your memory, and then tomorrow some guy walks up to you, punches you in the face, gives you $100, I don't think you're going to feel like you consented to that punch. Something is going to feel off or wrong. Even if you were shown a video of you consenting to the thing, it would almost feel like a doppelganger, because with the alteration of the memory, something is just not there. So when a question is asked about like if a person doesn't have memory, if a person doesn't have this or that, this is like one of the fundamental traits of what I think it means to be a person. Now, realistically, there are some people that have these kind of like amnesia, there's a word I'm looking for now, but people that have amnesia or suffer from it. That 7-second man on YouTube is like the most famous version of this. The easy escape, I would say, is just because you're no longer the same person you were before doesn't mean you're not a person now, right? So I could just say that, like, you might be becoming a new person every time, but it doesn't mean that you could be killed just because you're not the same person you were because your memory is altered so much. The more difficult approach is, I think you truly, at some point, there are things that we can strip away from a human mind where I think we would fundamentally consider this person something completely different. If you could imagine the removal, zombies, I guess, are a really good example. If you could alter a mind such that, they only experience anger, they just want to bite people and turn them into other zombies, and they have no capacity for speech or empathy or whatever, like at some point, would you consider the body that's trying to attack you, in a zombie-like manner, is this a human anymore? I think it gets really hard to answer that question. I would say we're looking at something that's ontologically different than what I would consider a person to be.
Can I speak to that? Is that okay? The question as well. I think if you are defining personhood as dependent on your memory, your ability to have memory, or your ability, of course, to have consciousness, whatever varying degree you pick of consciousness, then yeah, you have serious philosophical issues, because all of a sudden, is that still the person, like you just asked, after an amnesia, that their person that existed before, is this now a new, would it be a new legal person because it's now a completely wiped free brain, and now you have to completely have a new legal person in place, and are the rights of that person now different? Again, these are the kinds of pretzel mind games we fall into when we create an arbitrary standard for humanity. And to say that your development of your brain or the capacity for you to be deploying consciousness or your memories or all of these fluid definitions, because the reality is it's very hard to have one definition. Even Destiny was not able to define consciousness under one definition. And so to say that your moral worth is dependent on this really non-existent definition so far of consciousness is a really dangerous path. And that's why it leads to things like, well, baby jacks could be executed at 2 or whatever it is. It's a far better position to say if you are a human, then whether you're conscious or not, whether it's deployed or not, whether you have memory or not, doesn't matter. If you're a human, that's enough. You possess human rights.
Thank you. Hi. Firstly, I just wanted to say thank you, Destiny. All the liberals out there, appreciate everything, all the work you do, me especially. Question is directed at Lila. I believe you have a very extreme stance wanting to make abortion completely illegal, and the topic of medically necessary abortions and what constitutes medically necessary abortion, as well as how that decision is made. Is it made with the mother and a doctor, and et cetera, et cetera. But would you say, because you also stated that sex outside of marriage with the purpose of recreation or not intending to have a child or carry it to term, would you, if you could legislate it, would you make sex outside of marriage illegal?
No, of course not. Because I think people have the freedom to do things that, are morally wrong, and not every moral wrong should be illegal. But moral wrongs that should be illegal have to do with fundamental human rights, like your right to live. You can't enjoy any other human right, like freedom of religion or freedom of speech, if you're not alive and you're not protected from lethal violence against you, which is the case of abortion. It's lethal violence against a child. And you referenced medical, you used the term medically necessary, I think, abortion, and the reality is abortion is not medically necessary. And that's not my opinion, that's thousands of medical experts who say that, both in the United States and globally. And I've worked with pro-life OBGYNs, and we work with them regularly at Live Action, who say that you can love them both in a medical setting and care for both mother and baby. In very rare emergency situations, you may need to do an early delivery, but the goal is not to destroy the baby and kill the baby. The goal is ultimately to save both lives. And that's how I think our healthcare system should run. I think what's extreme is the fact that we're permitting the murdering of children, direct and intentional dismemberment and starving to death of unborn human beings.
What if the mother was to die, even though it's before 16 weeks?
You're saying, what if the mother were to die? In what case? You're saying in a medical emergency, the mother may die?
You can deliver the baby from the dying, right? What if the mother is to die?
As I said, in an extreme emergency situation where there's no other solution except an early delivery, that can be morally illicit.
I'm sorry, there's no more follow-up
But the goal there is
questions.
not to kill the baby.
Would you make it illegal for at 8 weeks, woman is pregnant, she's going to die if she carries through the pregnancy, and you can't deliver a viable fetus at 8 weeks? Would you make that type of abortion illegal?
So this is a hypothetical that's been used multiple times, and I've worked with, again, thousands of medical professionals who talk about this. There's a whole American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists who work with high-risk pregnancies. Usually those, really the only ones that are documented that we have looked at and addressed that there's no other way except an early delivery, is later in pregnancy. So this idea of an 8-week-old with a baby itself, the fact that the baby is somehow causing this emergency situation, find me one case where that has happened.
Isn't there the case when a woman gets pregnant for a second time, there can be like an autoimmune reaction, or there's an immune reaction that causes a whole
you can treat that, Destiny, and that's the whole thing.
So you would mandate then, so you would make all of those illegal, regardless of the sex of the mother.
You should not just go knee-jerk reaction, kill the baby. You treat the condition that the mother is facing to save her life and to protect her life and to safeguard the life of the child. When in every possible case, the issue with our healthcare system is that if there's any issue, if the baby, literally, my nephew was missing his hand in utero. They found this out at the 20-week scan as an example, right? They recommended abortion, knee-jerk reaction, because the baby was less than perfect. If there's any health issue the mother has, hypertension, high blood pressure, maybe you should have an abortion. Abortion is recommended as this panacea solution to really any situation, when the reality is you can, and they do, and there's countries that are totally pro-life and ban abortion. They have very good maternal care and low maternal mortality rates. Before Ireland made abortion legal, they had one of the best maternal healthcare systems in the world and the lowest maternal mortality rates, lower than the United States, which had abortion legal at the time. So you can care for both patients.
My question's for Destiny. Earlier, you tied personhood to the body's and specifically the brain's capacity to host the mind. That being super important to your definition of personhood. With birth coming into play now at this stance, it can change a little bit, but I'm curious if someone were to have such as Alzheimer's or dementia or a traumatic brain injury, and their body, and specifically their brain, lost all capacity to host the mind, which in your terms seems to define their personhood, which gives them their right to life, would that injury or that disease that removed their capacity to host their mind and thus their right to life, would they then lose their right to life? And not in a case to where if, they just die, we don't resuscitate them like a DNR, but would we be then legally permissible and legally allowed to then deliberately, like in the case of abortion, not just let their life end, but take their life and end their life because of that status of their brain and their mind?
Yeah, I think we essentially already do this with people who are comatose or who are like in a permanent vegetative state. Like the body, the equivalent to killing them, I guess, you no longer feed them. But we already make these decisions when the person's mind is clearly unable to come back to any kind of conscious state.
Hi, my question is for Destiny, but Lila, I'm a huge fan of yours. Thank you for coming. Destiny, follow up on the earlier question about fathers. Do you think that fathers have equal responsibility to their children as the mother? And if so, how do you reconcile that the child in the womb is equally the father's and the mother's to only allow the mother to decide whether or not to have an abortion?
So do I think they should have an equal responsibility? As much as possible, but the child can only be carried by the mother. There's no other way for, at least as far as I'm aware, is for the father to carry the child to term. So as long as the child is using the mother's body, then it's the mother's body that has the autonomy threatened the most. It's the one that has to endure most of the gestation and delivery process. It's not the man at all. So as long as she's the one that kind of has to suffer that burden, she should be the one that gets to make the call on whether or not she carries it to term.
Even though the baby is not 75% the mother's, it's 50% the mother's and 50% the father's.
The baby might be 50% the mother and 50% the father, but it's 100% in the mother's body.
But it's also 50. It's 100% also the father's child, right? It's also his child.
It might be. Somebody could own a safe that I have more than half the money inside, but if it's their safe and it's their combination, they're the ones with access to it. They're the ones that move it around. The father can have 50% of the genetic material, but the mother is the one that has to endure. A father can get a mother pregnant and then just completely leave and vanish forever. Mother doesn't have that luxury. That's not even a potential for the mother to do because she has to carry the baby to term, and there's no way to share that responsibility.
Should the father have to pay child support?
Should the father have to pay child support?
Even if he would prefer abortion, but she's insisting on not.
There's a difference between a moral question here and a state question.
Legally.
So legally we mandate the father pay child support because when the courts are looking at the child, they only care about the concern of the child. So it's not more is it fair to the mom or is it fair to the dad? It's just child support should be paid because the care of the child that's what the state has the biggest interest in. And I think that's probably fair. Generally it takes two to tango.
But even if he wanted the abortion, he's on the hook for 18 years of child support.
Sure. There might be some argument to be made if you have a written statement or something saying if I get pregnant, I will have an abortion or whatever, and then if the mother decides not to, then the father might have some financial option there, but it would have to get into that territory, I guess.
Hi, you guys did a great debate. You guys, it went by really quickly, I feel like. My question is for Lila. Do you place, the baby's life higher than a woman's? In the case of Adriana Smith in Georgia, where there was abortion bans, and they used her as an incubator, even though the baby was 6 weeks. What is your stance on that?
So no, the baby's life does not take priority to the mother's life. I think this is something that gets lost sometimes in these debates. I think they're equal in value, and they should both be treated as patients in a medical setting. And in the case of Adriana, she was deceased, and they were using her body to continue to shepherd that baby until the baby had the opportunity to be delivered. And then the transfer of care could go to another adult to take care of that infant. And I think that's a wonderful thing. Chance is now 8, weeks old, and he's thriving. He's born, he's healthy. I'm so glad he's here. And to say that he should have been killed because his mother was also killed in that tragic accident, I think is completely wrong and unfair to Chase.
Hi, Lila. I'm a big fan of your work from Live Action, so I have a question for you today. Today, you've made the argument based on a secular view from biology, ethics, and constitutional law, but I know you're also a religious person. So for you, is your religious conviction more powerful in persuading you against abortion than your secular support? And should that be the case for society, even though we're not a theocracy?
Thank you for your question. So when I was in high school, and I started Live Action at 15, so it's been a while, I went through a period of time where I wasn't sure if I had any religious belief, or I was exploring different religions or lack of religion. And during that time, I was just as passionately pro-life. And so, and I met wonderful pro-life, very secularists or atheists or agnostics, however you want to call them. And so I think that I believe that my faith absolutely makes me passionate about love and loving God and being loved by God. And I do think that it's very clear that faith teaches that life is sacred and made in God's image. And I think that a society that sees that is going to be a healthier society that can flourish more, not just in eternity, obviously, because eternal souls are online, but in this life. But I also think that you don't have to base your argument on religious belief or articles of faith. You can base it on natural law, what can be perceived by any of us, and it's not an article of faith.
So in the case of the identical twins, can you explain what you believe is happening there in terms of life and souls? Like, does one life become two, or if you believe that life begins at the moment of conception, what's happening there?
I think life begins at the moment of fertilization, and when there is twinning that happens, then it can actually come and become two lives, which is actually an incredible miracle. So I'm not sure are you asking about when the soul then?
Well, I guess it's interesting to me that, like, if we believe, because at that point then it wasn't a life at the moment of conception.
No,
it was after it split, and then it became two.
And it split and it became two. Yes, and it's an incredible miracle.
Like an
I believe.
amoeba?
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And sometimes they don't split and they're born as Siamese twins, and they're still, miraculous lives that should be protected.
Hi, Destiny. So my question is, to what extent does the capacity to feel pain factor into someone's personhood? If hypothetically being aborted was more painful than pregnancy, would that change your perspective?
I don't think pain is a great indicator of much of anything. It's hard to quantify, and I think a pain sensation, like to see like an organism respond in some way to a sensation, is a lot different than the understanding of pain or suffering. I don't even know how you'd begin to measure up like one versus the other. I think I'd be really uncomfortable saying that like this person should die because they experienced less pain or more pain than another person. I think I would have to, I don't know if I would factor that in as much when you're talking about like ending lives.
Yeah, I think pain is an indicator, obviously, of life, but it's not the definition for life.